Wait, don't be alarmed by the thumbnail. Don't worry, I haven't sold out. And if you clicked on the video because of the thumbnail expecting it to be a breakdown of all the Easter eggs and secret details you might have missed or something, yes, I am making fun of you. Nah, I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm not, but anyway. I think we're all aware of the fact that we're in an age of media that loves referencing itself or other more popular media. It's partly why there's been a rise in multiverse stories over the past few years. It's a cheat code for being able to access things you want to reference without really putting in the work. With that, I've become increasingly annoyed with the way that's been done. The lack of care put into referencing stuff, expecting the audience to eat it up, which a lot of the time they do. Simply pulling the classic,
I understood that reference.
Monkey brain gets a little dopamine hit, monkey brain rates movie good, more people see movie studio make more money. Hooray for our corporate overlords. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about what I think are good references and why I think they work, compared to what you see from stuff like Spider-Man No Way Home or The Flash, for instance. I came up with the idea for this video because I've been doing what everyone else has been doing since the beginning of June, thinking about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and I remembered the line where Spot says,
"The power of the multiverse in the palm of my hand."
Which is a line I liked, but I hated in No Way Home when Doc Ock says,
"What machine?"
The power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
So I was trying to understand what makes these two different, since they're both obviously near verbatim references to the line originally in Spider-Man 2.
The power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
And I think I figured it out, or at the very least I'm gonna gesture towards the answer for a bit and maybe something will click. So, in No Way Home, Doc Ock says it because he's explaining to Spider-Man what his machine is. So it's a very forced line, because you'd expect Otto, if he really believes that is his Spider-Man, wouldn't explain what his machine is, especially if he's still evil, or he'd at most say something like, "Are you trying to trick me? Where's my fusion reactor?" Which is also a clunky line, but at least makes sense with what the context implies. The reason this is annoying to me is because you can feel the writers trying to get you to remember the iconic line from Spider-Man 2, rather than naturally using dialogue that would fit. When stuff like this is said, or even,
"You know, I'm something of a scientist myself,"
it completely takes me out of the movie. And since I'm a miserable adult and we've been absolutely inundated with these things, I'm no longer like,
He said it!
Instead, I'm like, but in Across the Spider-Verse, the same line from Spider-Man 2 is referenced, and I thought it was good, so what's the deal? Well, Across the Spider-Verse doesn't use that line as a wink to the audience to try to get you to like the film because you like the thing it's referencing. The short version is that the line works in this film, regardless of you understanding the reference or not, unlike No Way Home. If you had never watched Spider-Man 2, you could hear that dialogue and move on with the film, because the reason that line is there is to tell you something about Spot, about his newfound appreciation for his spots, realizing they're not a curse, they're a gift that he can use to achieve his potential. Basically, the line is used here exactly as it's used in Spider-Man 2, to show the villains awe over the power they have. That line is also a good way to tell the audience subtly that Spot's powers are volatile, much like Doc Ock's fusion reactor was, using the line to evoke the same idea we got from when Doc Ock said it in Spider-Man 2. The point here being that Across the Spider-Verse uses the line to tell the audience that has seen Spider-Man 2 that the filmmakers are aware that that specific beat in the film is similar to the beat in Spider-Man 2, even if the context is different. So this brings me to Community. In Community Season 1, Episode 23, the first paintball episode of the show, Jeff has sex with Britta and afterwards she threatens him with her gun.
You sure that's a gun? Maybe it's a metaphor for your fake jaded persona. Uh-oh. No paintballs, Hans?
Now, this episode has many references to Die Hard and other films, but this one lifts a line of dialogue straight from the film, when John McClane steals a magazine from Hans Gruber's gun, tricking him to pretend like Hans has the upper hand when he in fact does. And the show does this reference perfectly. I'll let Dan Harmon first explain why, then I'll chime in.
This is an example coming up of the deliberate reference just to cite Die Hard, the scene between Alan Rickman and Bruce Willis.
We literally say Hans.
Yeah, so I have him literally say Hans, not because I'm Seth MacFarlane, but because I don't want to, as with the John Hughes stuff in the pilot, I don't want to be just ripping stuff off to tell a story. Like, if you don't know the reference, then you think that I'm awesome for writing this thing where somebody took the clip out and they're playing this game of back and forth and then the dry click, click, click. Yeah. Oh, you think I'm stupid? Like, you gotta cite your references when it's that specific.
Like I said about Across the Spider-Verse, what Dan Harmon does with his references in Community is to tell the audience that he's aware that his story is similar to another story, that he might be taking from something that's come before to make his own story work. The line from Die Hard being referenced isn't a Family Guy thing like Dan Harmon says. It's both the show and the character in-universe saying where they got the reference from. But the line works in context here anyway because Jeff not only says it in a way to show off his arrogance, building on the confidence he has in this episode, which is part of his arc in the episode, but Jeff is also established to be a film nerd who gets every reference Abed makes. If you understand the reference here, the scene is made better because you get an extra bit of characterization for Jeff, as well as knowing the show is aware that it's taking an idea from something, instead of trying to hide its influences. Which is important because I feel like, most of the time, writing is about self-awareness, about understanding the impact of what you're writing, about understanding what the audience may think when watching, and telling them that you're thinking it too, guiding the audience with you to where you want them to go, what you want them to take from your story, like in Community Season 6, Episode 1. The character of Shirley, played by Yvette Nicole Brown, left the show because Yvette wanted to focus on her family. So the show introduced a new character, Frankie Dart. Now, replacing a black character with a white one just like that between seasons could definitely have racist implications, or seem like whitewashing the cast, but the show knows that.
She'll be back.
Like Troy? Are any of you white people noticing what's happening to this group? Do Abed and I need to be concerned?
You have my word. As leader of the white people, there's no cause for alarm.
Say hello to New Shirley! I'm just kidding.
The reason this joke works is because the show is acknowledging what the audience may be thinking to let them know that they have thought of this. That way, the audience is willing to meet the show halfway and be charitable to the idea that a white character is entering and a black one left the show, because the self-awareness makes it clear to the audience that the intention isn't to whitewash the cast. So the audience takes that joke about the show understanding the impact of a certain decision and is willing to accept that the show wasn't doing anything out of malice, wasn't unaware of the implications of its decisions. Both the idea of self-awareness and the idea of embracing its influences, Dan Harmon takes them from Community to Rick and Morty. In the premiere of Season 2 of Rick and Morty, we have this little joke.
Is your shirt on backwards?
Yeah, I like it this way. I'm not stupid. Phew.
Man, that guy is the Red Grin Grumbolt of pretending he knows what's going on. Oh, you agree, huh? You like that Red Grin Grumbolt reference?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? I made him up. You really are your father's children. Think for yourselves, don't be sheep.
Rick here is making fun of people who pretend to get the references, the people who want to feel like they're in on the joke.
I don't know what you mean, but it had the cadence of a joke.
Like they understand everything the show says, when in fact it's fine if you don't get the references the show makes. It's not like the show will make any less sense if you don't get the reference. Then Harmon argues with this that his references aren't necessary but are little bonuses for people who do get them, to feel like the show isn't pretending to be smarter than it is, that it knows it's taking ideas from its inspirations, because every single piece of art is inspired by what has come before. I think this is clearest in Rick and Morty Season 6 Episode 2, an episode where Rick, Morty, and Summer went to an arcade called Blips and Chits, but the arcade was attacked by a gang, and Rick needs to get Morty out of the video game his mind was stuck in, so Summer needs to pull a Die Hard to keep Rick and Morty safe.
Just do a Die Hard.
But the thing is that Summer has never seen Die Hard, while the guy who holds Blips and Chits hostage, Chance, is a huge Die Hard fan. He's written a book about Die Hard even. With that, the show has Summer take advantage of not knowing Die Hard to do things that are unexpected because Chance keeps expecting Summer to do a Die Hard, while she just does what she thinks makes sense, subverting what Chance's men think she would do, and succeeding in killing them in the process. At the end, Chance has a gun pointed to Summer's head, and Summer seems to have lost, but...
Why are you laughing?
Well, it's funny. The way you said motherfucker. Just laughing.
Okay, it's just that.
Oh, does that happen in Die Hard? Does John McClane laugh and then Hans Gruber is confused, but then they start laughing together for a second?
That actually does happen, yes. Wait, you knew their names this whole time?
Not this whole time, no. You left your book in the bathroom. I read it while I took a shit. I mean, mostly the ending.
With that, Summer ends up turning the tables, and Rick wakes up, so he kills Chance's henchmen. In a meta sense, you could argue that the show is telling you that you don't need to get its references to other media to get through it, just like Summer didn't need to have watched Die Hard to get through the episode, but that knowing it, like Summer knows the ending of Die Hard at the end, can be very rewarding, as you can get a better read of what the show is trying to do, But it's not like Summer needed the gun taped to her back at the end there. Rick woke up right after and killed Chance's henchman. But it is helpful for her to get an upper hand, and it is helpful for the audience to arrive at an understanding of where the show is taking its influences from. Now, I'm not arguing that No Way Home thinks it's original when it does its references. It is very much telling the audience it is pulling from previous Spider-Man films, but it does so in a way that doesn't add any layers to the references. It's left as only a reference, but with no substance. Like I mentioned with the other examples, the reference is there as a bonus for the audience to get if they can, something that may add a layer to the experience, but that isn't required to find a moment that has a reference meaningful, because things like Across the Spider-Verse community and Rick and Morty make their own meaningful moments, whether they're influenced by or reference other media or not, while No Way Home,
The power of the sun.
The palm of your hand.
the Flash movie,
Let's get nuts.
Multiverse of Madness,
Just because someone stumbles and loses their way doesn't mean they're lost forever.
all need you to get the reference to understand its meaning, leaving its reference as hollow and meaningless, existing only for the satisfaction of being in on the reference rather than gaining a deeper understanding of the film itself and its characters.
Movie reference.
This brings me to the idea of intertextuality. The references I've been talking about are just media using intertextuality, that is, using something from another piece of media to evoke a feeling or idea, and, as I said, that idea can be used well to add meaning onto the media itself, but it can also be used as a crutch, a substitute for substance. You can have Michael Keaton's Batman in the Flash films say,
Let's get nuts.
and you may find it cool that Keaton is saying that iconic line he said that time, but what is even the point of him saying it? What's the meaning? When Keaton said that line originally, Bruce was intentionally acting in a manic state. The line isn't meant to be said by a calm Batman who's completely rational. Does he have that time he said it in mind and he's quoting himself? That's weird. The Flash film doesn't care, regardless. It just wants you to get more meaning out of that line because you know it was taken from a previous film. But I've talked about that type of intertextuality extensively in this video. So now I want to talk about a different kind. Nowadays, we're getting a lot of references to things outside of the media itself. You have John Krasinski playing Reed Richards in Multiverse of Madness because he was a fan cast for the character for ages, so I guess the filmmakers think it's cool to reference that, even though Krasinski won't actually play Reed moving forward with the MCU. Or the Flash film that has Nicolas Cage playing a version of Superman for a cameo referencing his cancelled Superman film. That's a reference to something completely unrelated to the film, a reference to something that has no meaning. At least with Doc Ock repeating a line from Spider-Man 2 in No Way Home, you have something to draw from. You can understand the idea the film wants to tell you, even if it's not implemented all that well, Otto trying to tell Peter that what he took from him was so powerful that it was the power of the sun in the palm of his hand. But with Nicolas Cage, what's even the point? It's a reference to a film that was never released. There's no possible meaning to be gotten from it. It's just a reference for audiences to turn around to their friend in the movie theater and explain the context.
I'll explain it to you later.
I mean, let's compare that to Across the Spider-Verse. That film has a moment where Donald Glover appears and is playing the Prowler. Now, if you don't get why this is cool, the scene makes perfect sense. Miles finds it interesting and odd to see a version of his uncle that looks like that, being live action. But if you do get why it's cool, if you get that Miles Morales' look and character in the comics were based largely in Donald Glover's character in Community, Troy, showing up in episode 1 of season 2 wearing Spider-Man pajamas, which in itself was a reference to an online campaign to get Donald Glover an audition for The Amazing Spider-Man, as well as Donald Glover playing an animated version of Miles in Ultimate Spider-Man. So when you see Donald Glover in Across the Spider-Verse, you may find it cool that the film is showing him the respect he deserves for his influence over the character of Miles being created. But it doesn't just serve as a cheap cameo to an idea that was discarded ages ago. It works within the story beyond any meta reference and doesn't waste time with it, unlike Nicolas Cage's cameo, which doesn't even make sense within the story of The Flash. The issue is that this kind of behavior is rewarded by audiences. I mean, we all remember the big push for either Doctor Strange or Tony Stark to say to the other character, "No shit, Sherlock," in Avengers Infinity War, just so the film would reference the fact that both Benedict Cumberbatch and Robert Downey Jr. played versions of Sherlock Holmes. Because of this, stories have become meta to a point where they need to address the criticisms they receive within themselves. The MCU, for example, uses She-Hulk to make fun of its own third act problem, or to make fun of the cameo fest that the MCU is, while still doing the cameo fest itself. I did say self-awareness is important when telling a story, but the self-awareness needs to fit in to not distract from the story. She-Hulk basically lampshades the fact that it is full of cameos by telling you that it knows that, but really, how much is the audience willing to meet the show halfway when it's doing the thing it's criticizing? The self-awareness of references in something like Community works because it's being aware of its influences, of the impact of the things it's doing, but it's not the show apologizing for being itself.
TV defeats its own purpose when it's pushing an agenda, or trying to defeat other TV, or being proud or ashamed of itself for existing.
So when you think about these self-referential moments in She-Hulk or the intertextuality in the Flash film, you see that references have become less about having a cool detail some viewers may pick up on, and more about having the detail be the entire substance of the story. Shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. understand that most viewers haven't read the comics, but it has little references for people who do. Like how the bus, the plane the agents fly in season 1 of the show, has a designation 616, which is a neat nod to the main comics timeline being 616, whereas Multiverse of Madness decided to designate the main MCU universe as Universe 616, making it actually canon that the main universe in the MCU is replacing the main comics universe in the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse. Now, every time you talk about the main universe in the MCU, you have the reference in mind, which will either annoy you because it means the comic universe isn't part of the multiverse in the MCU, or it won't matter because that numbering is just numbering. Comic fans are treated by the MCU as people who will simply appreciate references in and of themselves, not caring about the implications of them. The MCU thinks their audience will watch a new Rockstar's video and love all the Easter eggs they managed to find in the film, so they need to include more Easter eggs, to a point where the details stop being details and just exist as part of the film, because they're called attention to the point where you end up with a PowerPoint presentation onslaught of Easter eggs like The Flash, because now the audience recognizes things without the need for new rock stars, so it's easier for them to point at the screen and go, "I know what that is!" and therefore like the film. It's no longer things you might have missed, because there's no way you can miss them anymore. Films have become so reliant on these meta references that something like Homecoming ends with Zendaya's character, Michelle Jones, saying that she likes to be called MJ, alluding to the fact that she's supposed to be Spider-Man's love interest. Basically the MCU's Mary Jane Watson, but the film itself had done nothing to indicate that, and then we have a moment where she says she likes to be called MJ, and it's supposed to be a big deal because you get the implication of what that means from a meta sense. But imagine you didn't know about Mary Jane. Imagine this is your first Spider-Man film you've ever watched without knowing about the comic stories. What is the meaning of this moment? You're left confused, trying to understand why it matters that she likes to be called MJ. It doesn't mean anything in and of itself. I mean, even if you did get the reference, you might still be confused, because there's nothing in the first film to indicate MJ would become a love interest. That bit was just really shoehorned in. Kinda like the Robin reference at the end of Dark Knight Rises.
You should use your full name. I like that name. Robin. Thanks.
With all of this in mind, I think the only conclusion we can arrive at is that most films are viewed as simply products trying to get more money to the corporate overlords. So they're done with the cynicism of just throwing things at the film without any thought, just using the superficial idea of what the filmmakers think people will like when watching, not liking it in a long-term sense, just enough for it to make money in the box office. I mean, Multiverse of Madness did really well in theaters with all its cameos and the concept of the multiverse being explored, but now it's kind of commonly agreed that the story of that film sucks. Most films aren't made with the idea of telling their own stories, of standing the test of time. They're made as products. It's why it's so rare when things like Spider-Verse come around. A big IP telling a story full of heart and clearly not wanting to cater to an audience, just wanting to tell their own story. It worries me that franchises that we grew to love over the decades can just become bastardized by money-hungry corporations that make the once wondrous idea of seeing iconography you like in a new story become a cynical and tiring idea, where now every remake or reboot or legacy sequel just wants you to see that it is indeed part of the same IP you fell in love with, and not just a new chapter of a story you fell in love with. No Way Home will use the iconography and references from other Spider-Man films, but change it just enough so that they can sell toys that are clearly for this new product. Doesn't matter if the lizard looks like shit because of it, or you completely change Electro's design, the new toy will sure look cool. It's just become very clear that the only way to get out of this period of filmmaking is to stop supporting the content that panders to nostalgia and Easter eggs. Getting good writers and directors back in charge, not just corporate machines doing everything that Kevin Feige tells them to do, but I don't really expect that to happen anytime soon. So to end the video, I'd just like to say that I really do love Easter eggs and references, but not when they're the whole substance. I really want us to get to a point where the audience can tell when it's being pandered to, when it's being manipulated, to a point where Spider-Man No Way Home doesn't gross over $1 billion in the box office while Into the Spider-Verse can't even cross 400 million. Obviously, I don't expect things to change, but it does feel like people are realizing, little by little, that substance has been replaced by references. There's a reason why Book of Boba Fett was disliked more than The Mandalorian Season 2. The big bombastic cameo moments like Luke just don't have any staying power. You may have noticed how much I brought up Community and Rick and Morty in this video, and that's because, well, I really like both of those shows. Yes, even Rick and Morty in the current year sue me, but especially because I find Dan Harmon to be one of the greatest writers in terms of character and writing the line of making his stories very meta without losing any of the immersiveness of the actual story itself and the real hardships his characters are going through. I'll definitely make more videos about Dan Harmon and his writing style, but I just wanted to point out that if you're ever looking for an example of how to do something well in terms of filmmaking and writing, Community is the place to look. The issue that comes with his shows is that people who are inspired by it have gotten the wrong idea about what makes his writing special, just like my video about Joss Whedon and MCU humor, but that's a topic for another day. So the bottom line here is me telling you to watch Community. On a serious note, the way certain media like No Way Home appeals to nostalgia is, in a way, infantilizing. Obviously, I'm not saying that you shouldn't like these things, that you need to grow up. But the media itself is appealing to your nostalgia, to feelings you had when you were a kid being brought back. There's nothing wrong with letting your inner child enjoy that, but if everything in media is tailored towards that, we'll simply lack any new stories, any media that challenges the viewer. Community isn't the deepest, most challenging show ever made, but it uses references to get you to think, try to look at it a little deeper. I think movies like No Way Home and Multiverse of Madness simply appeal to the basic idea of the inner child within you, instead of using any of their story elements to do something new and different. It's why something like Top Gun Maverick is so interesting. It's a film that challenges the viewer, it gets you to think about why certain lines of dialogue or moments are lifted from the original, and how they pertain to the overarching theme of the story, how they characterize Maverick and Rooster especially, while still having the memorable iconography of the original film replicated to appeal to the younger you that watched the original and feels nostalgic over it. To put it simply, a lot of media, the MCU especially, is very pandery. It panders to your nostalgia, but media can also use nostalgia and references to build some great stories. We just need to stop infantilizing the audience and stop undermining the audience's intelligence.
Like that's ever gonna happen.